I think this presentation responds, and particularly this session responds to the discussions we've had on the 6th of April in Brussels, when there was a discussion about the importance of governance of natural resources, and that's something that should be brought forward much more, and we should discuss it up front, because that's a key issue here that we want to that we need to address, and that is basically the key to using natural resources well. And that has there are a number of reasons why we need to think about it in more detail. Let me just say how we get down to this issue of governance. Why do we think governance is important, and what is the locus of this research? I think this chart summarizes a bit of where we were ending up the previous session this morning. So we have drivers in the report, sort of increased incomes, increased population, there are global initiatives and so on. That has led to increased scarcity, environmental change, and in particular this has led to scarcity in a number of interrelated resources, which we've termed the well nexus. And that provides us with a new context within which we look at natural resource management. And this has a number of transmission mechanisms through which developing countries feel will see the new context. And one is sort of the domestic implications, which is what Emil has been discussing quite a lot about potential limits to growth, about sustainability of growth, and scarcity will have direct implications. And there was also the indirect, maybe the international component, as you said. So more on the sort of the middle right-hand side, the effects the well nexus has on developing countries through relative prices, incentives, and international resource flows. Now that then has implications for the management of land, water, and energy. And what is important then is to think through the country context, the governance issues and business initiatives, but particularly the governance of resources, how countries deal with this new context. And this new context is for instance, two issues: like suddenly you've got more interest in your natural assets from outside. How do you deal with that? The other issue is that actually we think that natural resources are very related, they're increasingly related, and you can't think about land policy or managing land only by thinking about land issues. You also need to think about all the resources that are related, so water and energy. So it's increasingly a complex issue that we're talking about, and that needs to be managed. And there are increased challenges for developing countries to manage this in order to promote inclusive and sustainable growth. Now, just in terms of the analytical framework for this report, and by the way, we're talking about analytical framework that we are considering to use in the substantive chapters 5, 6, and 7, so about land, water, and energy. So it's not about the report as a whole, but for these particular chapters, we are thinking about asking 5 sets of questions. And in particular, so thinking, first of all, to set a context, and how is the well nexus, how is it manifesting itself for a particular resource, to give some examples of the interrelations amongst resources. We would then think a bit about what is actually happening without if you leave it up to the market, as it were. If you leave it up to the market, what happens? Is land being allocated in the most beneficial way for inclusive and sustainable growth already? And what do business already do in terms of do they already save energy, water, or are they already investing in land efficiency? But then, of course, also to realize that there are market failures out there, and that actually, if you leave it up to the market on its own, then you might not get sort of the ideal situation of inclusive and sustainable growth that Emil was discussing, and that there are a range of public policies that you can put in place, and there are likely to be different examples in different countries that have led to different outcomes, and we want to learn from those. But I think the next step is one where we want to discuss much more about, which is about governance, which lies behind the good policies, and what leads a country to adopt a good policy, a well-integrated policy, and one that takes into account so all the interrelationships amongst the resources and ensures that it's implemented well. That is likely to depend very much on the interactions between the various players that are present, whether it's foreign investors, domestic investors, public policymakers, and civil society. And then we like to have a session on lessons learned. This is in the outline, and is one way to go about doing it. It is about so thinking about countries that have land and water available will attract more interests from abroad, and there are other uses of land, users, and that has different types of effects on the local economy, and then depending on the way these effects are managed, that might lead to inclusive and sustainable growth. Now, manage will depend on governance, and I think we've put 4 types of questions here, and we want to hear from you whether that's appropriate, whether we can do more questions. What are the really key questions we need to be asking to think about what is an appropriate governance framework to manage resources. And the first is to think through what are the interests of the various players within this. And to have a good map on that. So think about land investors, public policy, what are their interests? And then to think about, is there an institutional setting in which the two can relate, and also in relation to other actors as well, so civil society. So, and what is there a culture of trust and transparency? Because we think, from the literature on governance, it tends to be the case that the more transparent you are, it's likely that there is also be a good governance approach, and that might lead to better outcomes. And then to think about whether we can learn from the different contexts. So if some countries have been very transparent in their way of going about the interactions, and in other countries it has not been the case, has that then led to different outcomes in managing resource? And was that the case because there was good leadership, coalition building, and so on? We have a number of tools you can use for that, and that's all in the outline. And I don't think I want to spend that much time on it because I want to hear from all the other speakers as well. I think what I can do is basically to give one example of how this might work, and it's particularly focused on the land issue. And this is about the land conundrum problem that I outlined earlier this morning, which is that there is an increased interest in using land in acquiring land in developing countries, but it so far hasn't appeared to be the case to benefit developing countries that they are rich in land. And the question then is that because of poor governance frameworks? And here I quote some work that's done by Cotula from the IIED, and tomorrow we'll hear from somebody from the IIED. And they basically say that when we think about land deals, that there are it's not all bad news in the sense of type of contracts, that there are some contracts that are less bad than others, and that some contracts stand out, and that they sort of have a clear identification of the land being transacted, more specific requirements on jobs committed, and on local procurement and local processing and so on. And they then argue that this is because that in Liberia there's determined political leadership, a strong government negotiating team, world-class legal assistance, effective use of financial analysis, and simultaneous negotiation of agriculture and mining contracts. And they've made this outcome of a good contract possible. So this suggests that that there are a number of issues that are important. So you need to have good capacity to negotiate these contracts. So in order to manage land, you need to think about how you manage the contracts between public and private players, and so on. You need to be, on this basis, also transparent, because the contracts have also been ratified by Parliament, and they're actually available online. And also leadership in getting these things going. And these are all, these might all be important elements of the governance framework that we may need to identify, so that there are, is it so the case that whenever resources are managed, it is because there is good capacity to manage, there's transparency in their dealings, and there's also leadership in dealing with complex issues. These issues are increasingly complex. We've said that there are increasingly interrelationships among resources, and that these are managed well. So these are possible questions that we can ask in the development of the chapter, and we want to hear from experts on this. That's my last slide here, and basically the Brussels consultation suggested that that is particularly important to think about governance and the management of natural resources in a more upfront way, and we are beginning to address this in the chapters, and we're thinking about outline chapters now, and within those outlines we have a section on governance, and we need to think about what are the questions we need to be asking in those sections on governance that can help us to identify what makes up for a good governance environment to manage resources well. So what are the specific tools and methodologies that we should be using? Okay. Right, thank you.